So, Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. The first thing that I want to say about this game is it is a beautiful and dang near perfect love letter to old school Metroidvania games, specifically Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which is, in my opinion and a lot of people's opinions, one of the greatest games that has ever been made. It was, at the time, it was just perfect. It was just such a great game. All right, first thing, graphically. Graphically, I think that this game is phenomenal. I love the aesthetic style of it. It has sort of a watercolor presentation. I'm not a huge graphics fan, but for a 2D side-scroller like this, graphical presentation is a huge part of how, of how the game is received. The different little effects that you encountered in the game, they were all, varied, they were unique. There were things that made certain enemies or certain effects really stand out. The character design was fantastic. Miriam looked great. Miriam looked great. The other characters, not so much. Zangetsu, he probably had the most detail out of anybody beyond Miriam. Like, Alfred was sort of plain, Johannes was sort of plain. Dominique, she looked, interesting, and she had some personality about her. But I loved the gothic style, the gothic vibe to the game. It was done incredibly well. The enemy design was really nice. Like, there's, of course, the repetition of old school games that you fight, a Simeon, which is one of the monkey enemies in the game, and then you fight an upgraded version of him, and it's just a palette swap on the enemy sprite, which personally I enjoy. It brings me back to, when I was younger and playing these styles of games. So it's definitely something that I enjoy. Overall, graphically, I don't have a lot of complaints, and that's going to be the theme throughout this review, is I really don't have a lot of complaints. So graphically, I gotta give the game a 9.5. It looks fantastic. The presentation is amazing. And it hits on all the right chords. It really does. Gameplay-wise, this game, and I'll keep saying, it is a perfect love letter to old school 2D Metroidvania style games. It hits on all the same notes. It has clearly borrowed from elements from different games and, enhanced the overall package by adding these elements, like with the shards, the fact that you have shards that are directional, so you can actually, launch them in specific directions or utilize them in ways that are unique to the situation that you're in. One element of gameplay that I really did enjoy was the way that it wasn't flat 2D maps at all times. There were points throughout the game where you were technically just walking in a straight line, but the background was turning to signal that you were climbing a tower or rounding a bend or something, and that was really interesting, and it made the exploration feel a little bit deeper because it just didn't come off as a flat 2D plane. Combat in this game, it really hasn't aged much since Symphony of the Night and games of its ilk. It's, very simple. You swing your sword or you use your ability. If you get hit, you get, either knocked back or you get staggered for a split second. If you get hit while in the air, then you get, you experience a knockback. It's perfect, nearly perfect in its simplicity. I would have liked to have seen maybe some more unique effects for specific weapons. Like with Symphony of the Night, the Alucard sword, if you do the quarter circle forward attack, he does the disappearing attack that, he pops up behind an enemy, hits him twice, and then goes back. I would have liked to have seen more weapon-specific abilities, like with the whip sword. If you hold it, he launches it really far out. Like, more of that would have been fantastic. But I really don't have too many complaints. The gameplay is just near perfect. Again, like, the downside to gameplay is that the game doesn't really give you much reason to experiment with a lot of the different attacking shards. once you find a few that you really enjoy, you're just going to stick with them unless you specifically feel like experimenting with other shard types. But overall, gameplay, it's another 9.5. It's nearly perfect. Like, there are a few things that I think could have enhanced, but there's not a whole lot that I would say, holds back in this regard. Sound design, as you can hear right now, the soundtrack for this game is amazing. The different scores for the different areas are just beautiful, and they're wonderful. Like, I'm honestly considering purchasing the OST for this game, and I never purchase OSTs for games because it's just so good. Like, when you get into a boss fight and you get this, high energy, high intensity, sort of electronic metal sound to, the courtyard music being a little more somber, to the church music having that gothic, churchy vibe to it. What do we got here? To Igarashi-san, to everyone that made this game a reality, to my family, and finally to all gamers. Well, thank you. The voice acting in the game, which would fall into the sound category, the voice acting in the game is surprisingly good. It's a little flat in some areas, but honestly, I wouldn't expect, what are we talking about? AAA, EA kind of voice acting in the game. For what's there, it is fantastic. And it's just, the score for the game is just so amazing. And I can't find anything from a sound perspective that I would want to criticize about this game, or that I think would detract from giving it a higher score. So, in all honesty, it's a 10 out of 10 for me. The soundtrack for the game is fantastic. Maybe fewer grunts when you swing your weapon, like the fact that she grunts constantly when you attack. Sure, maybe you could argue that would have enhanced things, but in all honesty, I can't think of anything that I would say could really keep that from a 10 out of 10. Now, with any 2D Metroidvania games, level design is the catalyst for this game. You could have a game that is phenomenal from top to bottom, but has a terrible map that is not fun to explore, and it's going to be a garbage game. It doesn't matter how good the rest of it is. If the level design is not good, and again, Koga Igarashi and the team that worked on this game, they knocked it out of the park. You immediately get transported back to the PlayStation era, or if you were, a fan of the Game Boy Advance games, you immediately get pulled back to that era where, exploration was king. You can see that there's this chest up in this corner that I can't get to, so I'm going to have to come back here, and there's nothing that's so obscure or so hidden that you're really gonna miss out if if you're not paying massive attention to things. The exploration in this game is just phenomenal. I loved backtracking and going back to the new areas. Like when I first got Double Jump, I went back and tried to get to every ledge that I could almost reach before. And there are certain areas in the game where if you combine certain skills, you can actually reach areas that technically you shouldn't be able to reach yet. Now you're going to be stopped, not 30 seconds later, when you get to where you need that new skill that you don't have yet. But the backtracking in this game was fantastic. The exploration in this game was fantastic. The different skills and abilities that you obtain really make exploring the castle just a treat. And I'm trying to think here. I don't think there was a single area in the game, or location, if you want to call them that, that felt inconsequential. From everything from the underground research lab, the Oriental research lab, the Hall of Termination, the underwater passageway, the Searing Caves, like every location was really unique, and it had its different different assortment of enemies. And so every time you encountered a new zone, you were really excited to see what you were going to encounter in there and the different unique mechanic that specific area had, which is... It also lends itself to making the exploration in the game just phenomenal. So, I mean, again, I can't think of much to criticize about the level design portion of this. So, I gotta give it a 10. They knocked it out of the park. The castle was just amazing to explore. It was, really nice getting to see all of the different areas. The combat lent itself well to the different zones. And yeah, I mean, it was just great in my opinion. Now, story is where this game is the weakest, and it's where I expected the game to be its weakest. It has a decent story. The story is interesting enough to get you from point to point, but much like the games that it draws inspiration from, you don't really find yourself super attached to any characters. You don't really find yourself developing any sort of bond with any of the characters. The story presentation is linear enough that it's easy to follow, but it's not so blatant and on the nose that you know when exactly the betrayals are going to happen. And it has its fair share of twists, as you find out as you progress through the game. There are different twists in the game, which that's fine. I have absolutely nothing wrong with it. The presentation of them was good. The overarching narrative throughout the game, it keeps up with its story beats, and it doesn't fall into the JRPG trope of, at the very end of the game, oh, guess what? They were being controlled by this third party that you didn't know about until now, and they're super powerful and magical and are going to destroy the world kind of thing. It doesn't fall into that trope, which I think is great, but it's still, again, the story in the game is the weakest element. It's not that it's bad, because it's a decent story. It's just not great. There's just nothing, super astonishing about the story for the game. So overall, the story portion is going to get the lowest. It's going to get the lowest score out of this entire review. But I mean, still, it's going to get a 9 because for the type of game that it is, and for the type of story that is being told, it knocks everything. It checks all of the boxes that it needs to check. So overall, I mean, like I said, I can't find myself criticizing much about this game. There's very few elements that I didn't enjoy. Like maybe, some of the grinding could turn some people off, like when you're trying to get later game materials. They have a very low drop rate, and if you're not built to have as much luck as possible, then sure, they could be really hard. The flying beef that you get from the Naganti, or however you say his name, only having a 1% drop rate kinda sucks, because, to get enough to make all of the food items, you end up needing 5 or 6, I think, so you're gonna have to farm, 400 or 500 of him. Which is what I had to do, and I had over 100 luck when I was doing it. And so sure, that could turn some people off. The shard farming is actually really smooth. There's no shards that have, incredibly low drop rates that make them really obnoxious to try and get. So yeah, overall, I'm gonna have to give Bloodstained Ritual of the Night a 9.5 out of 10. It is an amazing game through and through. If you're a fan of old school 2D side-scrolling Castlevanias or Metroid games, this is a must-buy from me. 100% it is a must-buy. Do yourself a favor, buy it, pay full price for it as well, because I would love to see Koga Igarashi get to follow this up, and I would also love to see this genre get revived, because this game, it has shown me how much I miss 2D platforming RPGs. I guess that's the easiest way to say Metroidvania, because I don't like the phrase personally. It's just a mouthful, but it's shown me how much I miss that genre. So, thank you very much for watching my review of Bloodstained, Ritual of the Night. If you're catching this on YouTube, please feel free to join us over on my Twitch channel. It's twitch.tv/Frozen, FROHSINN. As always, and see you guys around next time.